Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the National Bleav Network. And with Texans training camp starting in just 1 week, I've compiled the complete breakdown we did of the Texans rookie class over the last few months. So in case you missed our individual shows or just needed a refresher, I've wrapped it all in a nice little bow for you guys. And you're about to hear from the insiders that we grabbed on second round picks Jayden Higgins and Aireontae Ersery, third round picks Jaylin Noel and Jaylen Smith, fourth round pick Woody Marks, and sixth round pick Jaylin Reed. You also get our interview with draft expert Joe DeLeone, who breaks down all those picks, plus sixth round pick Graham Mertz and seventh round picks Kyonte Hamilton and Luke Lachey. You could also help us out by sharing our content on social media. Tell everybody about it. Once you've clicked to subscribe on YouTube, also make sure you click for notifications so you see anytime we give you new interviews or new content. Every subscription inspires me to keep going with this. So for all you regular viewers, thank you so much. And in the last year, we have 400,000 views on YouTube. And that doesn't include all of our audio listens. In September, our show celebrates 12 years. Houston Sports Talk is the longest running weekly Houston sports podcast of any kind. 12 years. The anniversary is coming up pretty soon. Can't believe it. When we started, it was Gary Kubiak's last season as the Texans head coach. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while. All right. Without further ado, here's the breakdown of the Texans rookie draft picks. First up is Iowa State insider Rob Gray, who covers the Cyclones, or as Texans fans know it, Receiver U for the Cyclone Fanatic and the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Great to have you on the show, Rob, and can't wait to talk about our new receiving tandem, Jayden and Jaylin.
Yeah, pleasure to join you, Robert. Pretty unique situation, obviously, with those two guys getting drafted by the same team.
I assume there's some excitement among Iowa State fans that those guys are reunited down here.
Oh, no question. I mean, social media will tell you. I mean, and obviously within the confines of the Iowa State's facilities, I mean, they're obviously extremely excited too. I mean, seems like I don't want to say it's rare, certainly rare for Iowa State to have two guys of top 3 round caliber at that position that could go so close together, and fit, for one team in particular, in this case, the Texans. And from the Texas perspective, I mean, we heard how, glowingly they spoke of both of these guys and of Iowa State's program. It just makes perfect sense to get guys who are already roommates. I mean, I wrote a story about how they became fishing buddies after Higgins transferred in from Eastern Kentucky, and Noel, of course, was already there. You have that relationship already among, a receivers room that I know there's some really good guys there, but certainly some flux there as well. Seems to be a really good situation all around.
Unfortunately, there's a good chance new Iowa State guys might put ex-Cyclone Xavier Hutchinson, his job in jeopardy. Nico, Christian Kirk, Jayden, and Jaylin are locks, I think, to make the roster. Hutch, Mechie, Justin Watson, and Braxton Berrios will be fighting for those last couple of spots. So, I know they have definitely a relationship with Hutch, but his job's going to be a little in jeopardy because of those guys.
Yeah, that's a tough deal, but that's, the NFL, that's pro sports, right? I mean, I know that the way X comported himself was one of the reasons they liked Iowa State. I know, over the, few years he's been there with the Texans. But yeah, well, we'll see how it goes. I mean, it would be, I know Jaylin actually, I Bleav his freshman season, true freshman, played quite a bit, was Hutchinson's last season at Iowa State. So definitely a little bit of overlap there, but it's all business, like they say, once you get to the NFL.
Well, let's go ahead and start with second round pick Jayden Higgins, the first guy picked, who compares himself to Larry Fitzgerald, but some draft gurus compared him to Nico Collins. He's also, prior to the Texans drafting him, said that one of the guys he learned a lot from watching film and he's taken inspiration from is Andre Johnson. So, Rob, what will Texans fans love about the Jayden Higgins experience?
Well, they'll love his size. They'll love his route running. He's a very eager and capable blocker in the run game as well. You know, obviously a big play threat. I Bleav he had 10 touchdown season, averaged 18.5 yards a catch at Eastern Kentucky, and then came to Iowa State and immediately became just a great touchdown target. You know, the jump ball situations, the fades, go and get the ball. You want Jayden Higgins to be in that spot. And he showed that in the Senior Bowl as well. I mean, sat out the Iowa State Bowl game, the Pop-Tarts Bowl win over Miami. Interestingly, Jaylin didn't and had a huge game. They didn't win that game without him, but his last game in an otherwise very disappointing Big 12 title game, blowout loss to Arizona State, Higgins has over 100 yards catch in receptions. And he's a guy that will surprise you with that athleticism because you see his size. So I think he's the total package as a receiver. I don't know how quickly it translates, but I feel like he's experienced, B, he's physically mature, and C, he's a great teammate, and he'll do just about anything necessary to get on the field.
Gotta say, my favorite trait, though, of any trait a wide receiver can have, great hands. I'm just blown away. He's only had 4 drops and 295 targets since 2022. We've gotten so spoiled, Rob, over the years with DeAndre Hopkins and Nico Collins. Those guys just don't drop anything. But are there knocks against him, Rob, at all? I did see he had a lot of contested catches, and I heard one scout say he doesn't get enough separation, so that's why he's having to make all of these contested catches.
Yeah, I would say maybe that's a little bit, but then you look at his combine numbers, and certainly he ran a very good 40 for a guy his size. The other drills did very well. I know his athleticism score, while not as high as Noel's, which is off the charts, was very good. You could say that, but then again, they put him in a lot of contested throw situations. Like I said, he's the guy that, especially with the tight end, their top tight end was injured last season, that you look for him in the end zone. You find him one-on-one, you throw the ball to Jayden Higgins, and he's going to come down with the ball. So they created a lot of contested situations for him. I think he's such a good route runner, and couple that with very good speed for his size. I don't know if there is a knock, but I guess you could say that's a knock, but I Bleav he'll dispel that pretty quickly.
Yeah, one story that you have to love. There's a guy that comes out of nowhere, and he was a 2-star recruit out of high school. And if anybody's wondering, he is no relation to Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins. They share the last name, but no relation, even though they're both listed at 6'4" to around 215. So very similar looking guys. Is there anything, Rob, you can tell us about him personally, behind the scenes, how he was as a teammate?
I know his teammates raved about him, and certainly nobody, especially in this day and age with NIL and everything else, is going to, even before, nor should they have ever been upset with a guy that's trying to protect his professional stock. Jaylin was the ultimate teammate at Iowa State, along with another guy who, played his heart out, but isn't really a pro guy in part because he got injured all the time. For Jaylin to become such good friends with Jayden tells me a lot about what he is like behind the scenes. Front facing with us, he just smiles a lot, doesn't necessarily say a lot, but you can tell he's having a good time. He loves playing football. And that's another thing that's a hallmark of head coach Matt Campbell's deal at Iowa State. You're not going to get a whole lot of 4-stars, let alone a 5-star at Iowa State. But if you get guys that, quote, love to play football, as Campbell says, he'll take that any day and develop them. And clearly Jayden took some steps forward at Iowa State and is just a fun-loving guy. I think while you might not get juicy quotes out of him, he'll be fun to talk to just because he's got that type of energy about him.
One of the cool things is draft analyst Dane Brugler had Higgins as the 5th best wide receiver, Jaylin Noel as the 6th best. So those guys, according to some analysts, 2 of the top 6 guys in the draft. Let's move to Jaylin. What makes him so special? Start off on the field, Rob. What's so special about him as a receiver?
His speed and his ability to get to full speed, I think, is huge. I mean, you look at a guy built for, I can't remember who said it, but one of the many draft analysts made the comp. He's like Julian Edelman with more athleticism, significantly more. I mean, just the knock. I'll start with a knock on Jaylin. He had a couple high-profile drops. Drops were a bigger issue early in his career, but again, a guy who saw the field significant time as a true freshman with Brock Purdy in his senior season, and obviously Hutch on the field as well. Every year he's built like he was sort of a possession receiver his first couple seasons, in part because of what else they had. And every year he's built up his average. I think it was right around 15 yards a catch last season. Touchdowns. I mean, he'll make contested catches as well. He just tends to be a guy because of the routes he runs and because of his speed that gets more separation. And because of his size, it's not a guy that's going to be like Jayden Higgins. You throw a jump ball into the end zone too. But on the field, you'll see speed. You'll see just elite route running. You'll see another guy who's willing to block, even though he's not the biggest guy. Just a guy, again, that loves playing the game. You saw it in his reaction to getting drafted.
It's just about the health of him and what it looks like going forward, when he's going to be available. And imagine though.
Yeah, I'm teaming up with Jaylen with the Texans.
This is a kid that his heart is on his sleeve, you know. He'll become a fan favorite in a hurry. Texans fans are going to enjoy watching Jaylin Noel play.
You mentioned Brock Purdy. He has a real relationship with Brock Purdy to this day. Those guys have stayed in touch?
I Bleav so. And then Coach Campbell told me the story. Well, I asked a question. He told all reporters a story about Jaylen's first season. And they pair guys up just like any team would with a certain veteran. And obviously not all receivers can compare it up with Brock Purdy. So it was, as Campbell said, random. He ran with Brock Purdy, you know, in the summer and got to know him, and obviously became a guy who had almost 40 catches as a true freshman with Hutch back there and some other good guys, including, I think, Charlie Kohler of the Ravens, tight end. So a lot of elite pass catchers there, and Jaylin sees the field. Jaylen's the type of guy that if you're guys who have been around him, he's going to naturally form relationships with them, whether it's Brock Purdy, whether it's probably the walk-on sixth-string guy at wide receiver as well.
I'm going to throw out a quote that I Bleav was from your story, Rob, on Jaylin Noel. You quoted Cyclone head coach Matt Campbell on Noel and one of his teammates. Campbell said, quote, "I don't know if I've ever seen two leaders who were more selfless, didn't care how many catches he had. His whole thing was how could he impact his team and impact winning." What do you remember about talking to Matt Campbell about Noel and some of his teammates?
It's very telling because Matt obviously wants to, like any coach, he wants to harp on the leadership stuff, wants to harp on the culture stuff. And to single out Jaylin Noel, it tells you how high in esteem Coach Campbell holds Jaylin. I mean, he was a two-time captain, and he's gone through it all. Campbell will talk about this. You have to experience some failure. Well, Noel, one drop came in a game that probably would have won them the game in a 4-8 season where they lost, I want to say, all but one of those games by a touchdown or less. They just could not perform in the key moments. That was a growth point for him. I remember talking to him about that, and he just spoke candidly about how tough it was to go through it. But going through that made him a better player, made him a better teammate, made him a better person. We've seen that from the development standpoint, and you could see the elation when they win the Pop-Tarts Bowl over Miami. Again, meaningless. If they beat Arizona State instead of laying an egg in Jerry World, they're in the college football playoff. And we saw Arizona State, you know, just about beat Texas. That disappointment just washed away. And he had, like I said, had plenty of obviously pro stock to go in the third round. But he said, no, I'm going to play in this bowl game, this meaningless bowl game. And again, he doesn't play. They don't beat, you know, Miami in that game. I think that a roundabout way to say a lot about who he is, but loves whatever team he's on, loves the teammates he's with, the coaches. I mean, he's good with the media, loves the fans. I mean, very good person in addition to being an excellent football player.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of what he could do as a receiver, but the Texans have also struggled in the last few years to find a consistently good return guy, and he's got some electricity in the return game too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at his average, it's great. I mean, he comes at timely moments too. He's very elusive to go with that speed. So if he can juke a guy quickly, gets up to full speed very quickly. Iowa State is a program that it seemed like for years they didn't want to return anything. Like anything's a touchback on a kickoff. You know, you fair catch it wherever it's legally allowed. You know, didn't want guys punt returning. They'd had some situations in the past where there'd been some high-profile miscues, snafus, whatever you want to call them. But Jaylin Noel is so good. You know, they wanted Jaylin Noel returning punts, you know, whenever he had an opportunity, and trusted him to make the right decision. And again, a guy who I think he'd be very willing to be the type of gunner on special teams to come down and try to lay a guy out, you know, on the other side of it. So, I mean, I think that skill translates just as well to the league, you know, his punt return skill and his special team skills, as do his pass catching skills as well.
There's a clip from him at the Senior Bowl where he was asked what NFL DB he couldn't wait to go against. His answer, Derek Stingley. Well, guess what? He's about to get a lot of Stingley, which is actually a perfect prep for NFL Sundays. And oh, by the way, Rob, just a little funny factoid from Casario's draft picks with the Texans the last 3 years. See if you spot a pattern at all. Jalen Petrie, Jaylen Noel, Jaylen Smith, Jaylin Reed, Jayden Higgins, and then Kalen Bullock, if you like the rhyme. But I mean, it's just, it's so funny to look at the draft choices and all these guys.
Yeah, very, very interesting. There must be something about that first name. I think there are a lot of really good, you look in the NBA too, there's a lot of Jaylens, a lot of Jarens, a lot of guys that have similar names. A lot of good athletes seem to be named Jaylen, Jayden, Jaren, all kinds of stuff.
So really want to thank you. Also follow Rob on X at Rob W. Gray. Any final thoughts or just anything you want to plug about what you're doing up there?
No, just Cyclone Fanatic. It's started as a fan site. Now we do everything. I'm their beat guy. I was brought along because I'd done 10 years at the largest paper in the state, the Des Moines Register. And I guess I was brought in to add a sense of legitimacy, and it's just grown from there. It's probably the most visited Iowa State site beyond all the, traditional media outlets. And then the Cedar Rapids Gazette, independently owned. Not a whole lot of people up there probably care over there, down there. Sorry, care about Cedar Rapids happenings, but it's great to see places like that still doing well in media. So support. I guess my plug is support local media the best you can.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, fans here might need to start paying attention to Iowa State because Casario seems to have a lot of respect for what Matt Campbell's developing up there. And can't thank you enough for doing this. Thanks for giving us a few minutes. I know it's busy right now, but really appreciate it.
Hey, great to talk to you, Robert. I appreciate being with you.
Joining me now is Bleav colleague Nara Weng, who hosts the Bleav in Everything USC podcast. And last year, you sent us Kalen Bullock. That worked out great. So I'm hoping our luck continues with Jaylin Smith and Woody Marks. And it's great to see you again, Nara.
Great to be back on, Robert. The Texans keep drafting Trojans. I'm happy to talk to you.
Yeah, we love it. And let me start with third-round pick cornerback Jaylin Smith. The Texans traded up for him, even though draft gurus found it curious. And I know NFL Network's Lance Zierlein had him as a 6th or 7th round pick. Jalen's played outside corner, nickel, and safety. Actually started at all 3 spots. So I know Lance loved his versatility. He's depth in the secondary, which the Texans need since the starters are all set. So I want to start with you. What are the positives on Jaylin, and what will get Texans fans excited about him?
So the thing about Jaylin Smith is he's that rare breed, a guy who actually went to school, stayed at the same school for 4 years, got better with each year, and he's just solid and steady. Like you already mentioned, the positional versatility that he showed. So you're a guy that you can step in, play at any of the positions that you need in the secondary, and that's what he's going to really bring to the table. Now, I thought it was a little high for him to go in the 3rd round as well. I expected him to be a day 3 pick, maybe not 6th or 7th, but 4th or 5th round pick. And so moving up to get him did surprise me to see the Texans do that, but he's a guy that you're going to be able to plug in and help you out. Now, is he a starting corner or safety in the NFL? Probably not, but you can probably get away with starting him at nickelback at times. And if there's an injury or you just need a 3rd safety out there, you just need an extra corner, he's a guy who can fill that role because he's done it. Like you said, at USC, he was a starter at all 3 positions, and he's a guy who showed progress every year of his career. He works hard. He's going to get in there and do the job that's necessary, and he's not going to be flashy. So fans may not always notice what he's doing out there, but the positives about Jaylin Smith is that he's solid, steady, and he can do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, great tackler too. Also worth mentioning, 12 tackles in the Holiday Bowl 2 years ago. With their swarm mentality, I'm sure they'll love that. He was named co-MVP of that game, and it's hard to question Texans GM Nick Casario considering his hit rate on defensive backs the last 3 years. You got Bullock, Petrie, Stingley, and Lassiter. So until we see otherwise, you kind of trust Casario on Smith. Nara, what's the downside on Jaylin, if there's any? I know Zierlein said he has short arms, no burst in his first 10 yards or so in coverage, even though he really liked his coverage more in man than zone.
The thing about Jaylin Smith is, like all of the USC DBs in 2024, they had trouble with contested catches. Receivers kept getting contested catches throughout the season against USC. So Smith is a little bit on the smaller side at 5'10 and a half. And so if he's going up against a bigger receiver or a receiver that can jump up for those 50-50 balls, that's where you could see maybe a little bit of a negative. And again, he was not alone in the USC secondary with that issue, but contested catches are going to be an issue when he's going up against bigger receivers or more athletic receivers. Other than that, again, he's solid. He's not going to wow you with any necessarily single trait or skill like a guy like Bullock can, because he's just not at that level of athleticism, but he's going to work hard. He's going to do the dirty work and be successful. But in those 50-50 balls, that's where you're going to see a little bit of the shortcomings.
Yeah, luckily they're pretty much set in the secondary as far as the starters are concerned. Coming out of high school, Jaylin was a 4-star who had offers from Alabama, Clemson, Michigan, Oregon, UT, and Washington. So very well thought of coming out of high school. And do I have it right that he was in the docuseries Coach Snoop with, of course, Snoop Dogg?
That's right. He played on Coach Snoop Dogg's team in that Snoop Dogg Youth League. He was a guy who actually started playing for Snoop younger than what most of those guys are who are on Snoop's team. Snoop was pretty impressed when he saw him try out, said, oh, he'll be good, but we'll see. And then the guy told him, oh, well, he's actually a couple years younger than the guys on your squad. And so Snoop was impressed. And then, of course, they had the docuseries on him. So he was one of the featured people in that documentary series about Coach Snoop's youth football league team here in Southern California. So, yeah, Jaylin Smith's already used to the bright lights of Hollywood.
Yeah, speaking of that, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Jaylin is becoming the second Texans defensive back who's been in a relationship with an Olympic gymnast gold medalist. Of course, Jonathan Owens is now married to Simone. Biles was with the Texans a few years ago. And Nara, didn't Jaylin used to date her teammate, Suni Lee?
There were rumors about that. Again, I don't really necessarily know everything about the personal lives of these guys, but there had been rumors that he was dating Suni Lee. I don't know how true that is. I don't know if that's a current thing. I don't believe it is, if it ever was a thing. But yeah, I mean, I think he's a guy who is very comfortable in Southern California, and he'll do just fine in Houston in terms of media responsibilities and things like that. So again, I think Houston's getting a good player in Jaylin Smith. A little surprising that he went in the 3rd round and that the Texans moved up to get him, but he should make the team. He should contribute as a backup, as a nickel back, in special teams. He can do all those things that help a team win.
Yeah, I can just assume that it's true because I saw it on Wikipedia, so it's got to be true. No, I checked an article and it looked like he had even responded to it or something on his Instagram. That they were in a relationship, but according to everything that I read, that was a few years ago, so it wasn't anything recent. So it's not still going on. He's still close with his old teammate, Kalen Bullock, and knows all about the SWARM acronym, famous with the Texans and what it means. I expect him on special teams quite a bit, so I'm guessing they believe he's going to be real solid there too. I want to move over to Trojan that's also coming to Houston, but before we do, for all our listeners, I want to hear your Texans takes. Let me know in the YouTube comments. You can support us and get updates on every show that drops by subscribing on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up and listen while you're out and about with your favorite podcast app. All right, Nara, right after Jaylin Smith, the Texans draft running back Woody Marks in the 4th round. They give up a 3rd round pick next year to get Marks. He plays 4 years at Mississippi State before finishing up at USC this past year. What will Marks bring to the Texans, Nara? I know you really like him, right?
Love Woody Marks. Thought he was the steal of the Texans draft. Can't believe he went as low as he did in the 4th round. I thought he was a day 2 pick for sure. And I was surprised that he was the 10th running back off the board in this draft. I know it was a good draft for running backs, but after the top 4 of Gent, Hampton, and the 2 guys from Ohio State, Judkins and Travion Henderson, I thought that it was a free-for-all for who that 5th running back could be, and it was basically personal preference. I thought Woody Marks could have been easily the 5th running back off the board, so to get him as the 10th running back in the 4th round. And yes, you did have to give up a 3rd rounder next year, but I think he's a guy who's a value pick anyway if it was the third round, if you had drafted him there this year. So the thing about Woody Marks is he is just an all-around solid back. Like, he's not going to necessarily have that top-end athleticism, so he's not going to run away from guys necessarily down the field and break away those huge runs, but he's a guy who's just going to do everything you need to do out of an NFL running back. A great pass catcher, a guy who caught a pass in every game of his college career except for the final one when he got hurt on the second drive of the game for SC against Notre Dame. So 56 straight games, which was the active longest streak in the nation before it stopped when he got hurt against Notre Dame. So he made a catch in every game of his career. Isn't that what NFL people are looking for out of running backs? Guys who can catch it out of the backfield. And he's a good runner. He's a guy who didn't just pad his stats against bad teams, had 100 yards on 13 carries against Michigan, and also showed something big in that game when Miller Moss fumbled. Kenneth Grant picked up the fumble, was rumbling with it, and he got tracked down by Woody Marks, who ripped the ball away to get the possession back for USC. So he's hustling as well in those kind of situations. He had over 100 yards against Penn State in that game. That should have been a USC win. The thing about Woody Marks as well is that he's a good teammate. He's a guy who is really well liked by the guys at USC, even though he only spent 1 year there. And what I do on my show is that every week with my guests leading up to a game, when we preview the game, we have a prediction segment. There's always the player we believe in. Of course, we work for the Bleav Network, so the player we believe in every week. In 10 of the 12 games last season that Woody Marks played, he was picked by either me or a guest as the player we believed in for that week. So that tells you all you need to know. Best offensive player in 2024 for USC, a guy who should have had even better stats if Lincoln Riley would have just run the ball more, which he should have done. So I think the Texans are getting a great one in Woody Marks.
Hey, look, I said the Texans had to take a running back in the mid-rounds. I even suggested the fourth round until they had traded away their fourth round pick, but of course they got it back. Dameon Pierce has struggled, and he's in his final rookie contract year. So This is perfect for the Texans. He's a 3-down back, Nara. Definitely love this. He's only fumbled, if I've got this right, in 608 carries once in his college career.
That's correct. One time that he fumbled in his career. So you're getting a guy who's got great hands, a guy who's going to contribute in the pass game, a guy who's going to track down guys who steal the ball away from you. I mean, you're getting everything you want out of a running back. Yes, he's not 6 feet tall. He's not 225 pounds. But I think Woody Marks is going to have a very successful career as an NFL running back. And I think, again, the Texans steal of the draft for them.
Couple of fun facts about Woody. He got his bachelor's in kinesiology from Mississippi State and was pursuing a certificate in gerontology at USC. Woody's mom and brother recorded his games and took notes. So he didn't just get the coach's film session in college. He got the family film sessions as well. He got critiques from them. And then his given name is Jaquavius. The nickname Woody is from his grandmother because he loved the movie Toy Story growing up. And he wore a Woody costume for 7 straight Halloweens. Is this news to you, or you already know this story?
We know all about the Toy Story love for Jaquavius Marks. And again, Jaquavius, not necessarily a hard name, but it is exotic. And as someone who has maybe an exotic name myself that people seem to have trouble with, even though it's literally 4 letters and 2 syllables, I can see why people like to call him Woody, because that rolls off the tongue a little easier maybe than Jaquavius. But a great story that he loved Toy Story, dressed up as Woody for Halloween all those years. And again, like Woody, I think he's a steady winner and he's going to contribute a lot. Now, if you're going to ask about any kind of possible downsides to him, he does need to get a little bit better, I think, in pass protection, because, again, he isn't the biggest guy. So sometimes he did get run over by guys coming in on blitzes. And so that's maybe one thing to get better at. But obviously, I think he's a great all-around running back who can really fit what everyone is looking for out of running backs in the NFL today.
Well, he's going to be here for that mini Trojan reunion. So it should be fun. He's at Nara Weng Sports on X, of course. And tell us about your show. Anything else you want to plug as well?
Yeah, Bleav in Everything podcast, obviously covering all USC athletics. If you're looking for me on X, like you mentioned, at Nara Weng Sports, NARAWENG Sports. Also doing play-by-play on various things here and there as well. So you can maybe catch me doing some of that. But yeah, of course, Bleav in Everything podcast, part of the Bleav Network.
Fantastic. Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate you taking the time with us.
Oh, you got it, Robert. Again, your team keeps taking Trojans. I'm happy to come on and talk about them.
First up, Tony Liebert, who has covered the Minnesota Golden Gophers for the Bleav Network and for goldgophers.com, and is now covering them for Bring Me the News. So Tony is very familiar with second-round pick and new offensive tackle Aireontae Ersery. It's great to have you, Tony, and just kind of looking forward to your insight on Ersery.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love this landing spot for Ersery, and I think Texans fans are going to love him too.
What I know about Ersery so far is he is unusually fast for a big man. 6'6", 330, one of just 4 prospects at the combine to ever run a 5.05 40 or less at more than 330 pounds. And Todd McShay called him one of the 3 best tackles in this draft class. 419 snaps last year, just 1 sack. We love that here in Houston. And I Bleav he gave up just 5 sacks in 3 years as a starter. What else can you tell us, Tony, that's going to excite Texans fans about Ersery?
Yeah, so I guess not to get too hyperbolic, but when I was looking at potential landing spots, the Texans were a big one, obviously looking for a long-term replacement at left tackle for Laremy Tunsil. And if you laid out all of the scenarios for Aireontae Ersery's career, that is like top of the top, but they do have similar skill sets, is basically what I'm getting at. They're both very athletic. And athleticism is the number one thing for Ersery. He's athletic enough to play tight end, in all honesty. He was a mainstay on the Gophers' offensive line. Classic Big Ten road grading offensive lineman, hard nose, high personality too. He is from Kansas City, but he really bought into the Gophers' culture, which is always cool at the college level. He hated the rivals that the Gophers have. I just think he's going to be a great NFL player. He improved every year in college, and I expect him to do the same at the next level.
Now, didn't he shut down the 3rd overall pick, Abdul Carter, when Minnesota played Penn State? No sacks for Carter in that game, right?
Oh, yeah. That honestly might have been the best game of his career. Not a lot of people were picking Minnesota in that game, and the Gophers held their own throughout the whole game, came up short in the end. And I think a big reason why was they were able to slow down Carter, which not many teams were able to. And I think a big reason why was Ersery, who showed why he deserved to be a top 100 pick, and he can have the same level of potential in the NFL.
He's a left tackle who did get 70 snaps at right tackle early in his career, but his best chance to play in his rookie season, maybe guard, Tony. Texans GM Nick Caserio said nobody thought Titus Howard could play guard until he did it. We're never putting limitations on what a player can or can't do. He's a tackle until he's not, unquote. So, Tony, can he handle guard, or has that even been discussed?
Yeah, I mean, at the college level, obviously he had all the traits to be a tackle, and that's where he was. But based on the athleticism, I think he could totally move into guard. I think he's willing to do that. He's a football player, and he just loves football, so I think he's going to do whatever he can to see the field right away. Oddly enough, you bring up Nick Caserio, and I remember this last season when the Gophers played Iowa at Huntington Bank Stadium, I was sitting next to Nick Caserio in the press box. So that could have been a big game for Ersery as well, and they're scouting for him. I wasn't able to talk to Caserio, but I knew he was intently watching the game, so it is kind of interesting to see how that works out now 8 months later about. So, I think he could totally move into guard. He has the athleticism to play either guard position or either tackle position, in my opinion. But if everything does work out well, I think he can be a long-term left tackle.
You said the magic words. You said he loves playing football, and that's the kind of guy that Caserio loves. I mean, they talk about that all the time. And NFL.com scout Lance Zierlein, who's also a local guy here in Houston, says Ersery's upside is an average tackle. What did you hear about his downside, if anything? What separated him from the first rounders?
I just wouldn't necessarily agree with him. I think he does have really high potential, and I think he has pretty high floor as well. I just think he's going to be a starter in the NFL for 10 years. I don't know if he's going to be a Pro Bowler, but it would surprise me if he wasn't able to stick in the NFL for a long time and get to that second contract, in my opinion. But the athleticism is what raises the potential, and he checks all the boxes. So I don't necessarily know where he's coming from with that. I'll admit I'm not a NFL grade level scout, and I respect Lance Zierlein, but he has all the traits, I think, to be an interesting project at the bottom line. So I don't necessarily know where he's coming from with that.
Ersery said he watched a lot of tape of Laremy Tunsil. It's a guy that he sort of modeled some of what he was doing after. If he can bring the Tunsil pass blocking without the penalties, I know Texans fans would love that. He had 3 penalties last season. Were they an issue at all, Tony, for him?
No, definitely not. There were a couple other offensive linemen on the Gophers that had issues with penalties, so that was not a talking point. It did not really stand out at all. The Gophers historically are one of the least penalized teams in the country, so I would not worry about that at all with him. Like I said, it just when I watch him play, I do see a lot of Laremy Tunsil, and you don't want to compare a guy to a multi-time All-Pro. I'm kind of sounding like the ESPN draft coverage here, but I think on the high end, Tunsil is a possibility.
That'd be good, at least, like I said, in some aspects for sure. Attitude, maybe not so much. That's a whole other story down here, Tony. I won't get into, but man, this guy's personal story is remarkable. His mom and 4 siblings bounced from place to place as kids, between beds or couches offered by family members in Kansas City, where he's from. And at one point, they were in a homeless shelter. His mom was usually working 3 jobs. They were constantly tearing eviction notices off doors, existing at times without running water. His story, real similar, actually, to Texans linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair, who also was homeless in high school. So, Tony, what do you hear about Ersery as a teammate, as a leader, about his personality? Can you give us a little bit about him off the field?
Yeah, I don't know how many people listening to this watch much Gophers football, but any player I think that comes from the University of Minnesota, as long as PJ Fleck's the head coach, character is not going to be a concern. He preaches really heavily being a life program and developing these guys who are young men into adults. And Ersery, I think, is a perfect example of that. You mentioned everything in his background that I guess held him back from reaching this point. And a program like the Gophers, I think, did a great job of almost embracing that. I think he's developed even more throughout his time with the Gophers. Small things, just like talking to media when he was early in his career to the end of his career. And he checks all the boxes. He might not be Laremy Tunsil, might not be an All-Pro, might not even be a Pro Bowler, but I just don't see how he's not going to be in the NFL for 10 years because I think he's got the right head on his shoulders. He's got a great support system around him. And he developed as a player at the University of Minnesota, but I think even more as a man.
If anybody's questioning this kid's desire, work ethic, or will, listen to this. In high school, he didn't just play tackle. He was a starting defensive lineman, long snapper, played basically nearly every down, barely left the field. And he didn't start playing high school football until his junior year, I believe. Tony, isn't that right?
Yes, that is correct. Just a great definition of a developmental prospect. He was relatively unknown when he came to the Gophers. Minnesota's not recruiting like Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State, but by the end, he was playing like an offensive lineman at one of those schools. So I think if you change the logo on his helmet, I think he would have been a first-round prospect. He just has so many traits you want to see from an offensive lineman.
Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of similarities between me and Ersery. There's about a foot difference and about 200 pounds. But one thing we did have in common, I noticed when he was chosen, the video showed he's wearing a Kansas City Monarchs cap, which is the same cap that I've got. So he's cool like that. So that was good to see. And, if anybody has any questions for Tony, you can follow him on X. If you want to ask him anything else about Ersery, it's at Tony Liebert. You can see it on the screen for you guys watching on YouTube. Just any final thoughts or, frankly, anything you want to plug before we take off here, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, last few things on Ersery. I just think he's a real loyal guy. Like I mentioned, he just bought into Minnesota, bought into the Gophers, and I fully expect him to do the same with the city of Houston and the Texans because he's loyal to his hometown in Kansas City. But I think he'll go head first into this. I have high expectations for him in the NFL. But yeah, you can follow me on Twitter or X for all the Gophers stuff at Tony Liebert, like Robert mentioned. And I think this is a great pick for the Texans, and I think fans should be excited.
One thing is not going to stop him, and that's, this is a guy that's motivated and cares and just incredible stuff. So thanks so much for giving us a few minutes. I know you're busy, Tony, up there, but really appreciate you informing the Texans fans on everything that we needed to know about Ersery.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Joining me now, our colleague from the Bleav Network, Tom Hannifan, host of the State of State, a Penn State football show. So Tom covered Texans 6th-round pick safety Jaylin Reed, and it's a pleasure to have you, Tom. I hope the Texans have better luck with Jaylin than their last Nittany Lion drafted in the secondary, also named Reed. Did you cover John Reed?
I did cover John Reed. Yeah, he was somebody that Penn State fans, I wouldn't say they were in love with necessarily. At one point, you could have described him as Penn State's #1 defensive back. I think the job that Terry Smith, the associate head coach at Penn State in charge of the defensive backs, the job he's done since, the talent that he's recruited since, has been far beyond that. So John Reed kind of had a feeling that that wasn't going to be the home run maybe that Texans fans were hoping it was going to be. But I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised by Jaylin Reed.
Yeah, totally different administration, better staff. So hopefully the Jaylin Reed thing works out a little bit better. And I just can't wait to hear about him because he's got a little buzz for a 6th-round pick. Sounds like a perfect fit in the Texans defense. NFL.com's Lance Zierlein projected him in the 4th round, 97 tackles last year, 3 interceptions. What can you tell Texans fans, Tom, to get them excited about Jaylin Reed? What are the positives?
The interesting thing about Jaylin Reed's 2024 season is it's almost looking at it like what could have been. And he had a very nice season to the stats that you just pointed out. For those that don't know, KJ Winston Jr., who was drafted by the Tennessee Titans, was supposed to be one of 3 defensive backs, 3 safeties specifically, under Tom Allen's defense. And you had Zakee Wheatley, who had an outstanding season and is still in Happy Valley. So it's supposed to be a 3 safety defense. KJ Winston goes down very early on in the season. Then Winston, I believe, is going to have a very bright career in the National Football League. But then Jaylin Reed went from playing kind of a hybrid safety linebacker position to having play a little bit more traditional safety. They still utilized him in a lot of different packages as a linebacker, as a blitzer. He was obviously talented in taking away the football. But my comp to him that I think Texans fans will like is he's a slightly bigger, more compact version of Jaquan Brisker, who's lighting it up right now for the Chicago Bears. Brisker, who was great at Penn State, one of those types of safeties who can play in between the tackles, not afraid to get his nose in there and really make an effect in terms of the running game and in the passing game, obviously. I think my favorite thing about this is fit, because the Houston Texans defense showed a lot of promise last year, and he's joining what looks to be a really veteran secondary. So I think he's going to have a lot of people helping him along the way, and there's going to be a lot of different ways that he can be utilized in Houston.
This guy's kind of a pass rusher in a way as a safety from what I saw. Even though he was only credited with 2.5 sacks last season, he drew 4 holding calls. His pass rush Pro Football Focus rating was only behind Abdul Carter on Penn State. So that's some fun stuff to look at.
Yeah, it's the exciting thing is he played under both Manny Diaz and Tom Allen as defensive coordinators there in the back end of his time at Penn State. And Manny Diaz, much more of a blitz-happy defensive coordinator, and he likes to use defensive backs to get after the quarterback. So I think you had a little bit of that still left over. Tom Allen kind of changed things a bit, still wanted to utilize the 3-safety look, but obviously didn't have the personnel to do it with Winston going down. So I think Reed is going to be able to fill in at a lot of different spots. And again, I mentioned the veteran depth you have at safety for the Houston Texans. CJ Gardner-Johnson coming over from the Super Bowl champions, Philadelphia Eagles. Jimmy Ward, longtime San Francisco 49er. That doesn't feel like to me there's an immediate need for him to play, and obviously taken in the 6th round, more of somebody you're looking to supplement your secondary. But I think being able to utilize him in certain packages, utilize him on special teams, especially Jaylin Reed is going to be able to do a lot for this Texans secondary given the opportunity. And I think he's just going to have the time to grow, which is a real positive.
Feels like he's just destined to be here. He models his game after CJ Gardner-Johnson, says the Texans are his favorite defense, even approached a Texans assistant coach at the NFL Combine and told him he wanted to play for the Texans. The one thing Reed needs to make an impact, though, this season is special teams. Can you tell us anything about him on special teams? Have you seen much there, Tom?
Yeah, seen plenty, and just that he's a regular contributor, and that relentless motor that you've seen on the defensive side of the ball, those pass rushes, being able to get involved in defense against the run. He's the same on special teams, and he's going to be aggressive. And I think the one thing that James Franklin and this Penn State football staff have continuously reinforced is that if you're put on special teams and there's an eye on playing you at some point, defensively, offensively, it doesn't matter. If you don't put in the effort on special teams, you're certainly not going to see the opportunity on offense or defense somewhere down the line. So he's put in that effort, and he's a regular contributor in that department. So I think Texans fans are going to be pleased with the effort and the desire to get after it with the special teams play from Jaylin Reed. I think he just contributes in so many different places, and it's that work ethic. I think that's the beauty of anybody coming from this Penn State football program under James Franklin, is that he instills a work ethic and that he is preparing guys to be pros at the college level and to be ready for the National Football League. So Jaylin Reed, I believe, is going to be able to contribute in a lot of different places. And he's not one of those guys who's like, oh, I'm on special teams, it's not where I want to be. He's going to make the most of every single rep he gets.
What did you see and what did you hear from scouts that were concerns about Jaylin? What are his weaknesses?
I think he's listed at about 6 foot, so that might be a little generous. 210, as I was saying, a little bit more compact version of a Jaquan Brisker. I think his, straight ahead speed is something that, it could be something desired, but when you're playing safety, you can kind of get away with some of those things. Play recognition is really good in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, he was asked to do a lot, both in the secondary and against the run, as I've mentioned a number of times. So I think Jaylin is, going to be somebody who is maybe not the best athlete on the field in terms of, is he going to be a shutdown safety of something like that? No, but I think his ability to contribute in a lot of different spaces, as I mentioned, is going to be his key to success long-term. I just think Jaylin, for him, it's going to be a matter of getting on the field because there is a lot of talent in this Houston Texans secondary. And even if you were thinking about bumping him out to corner or even utilizing him as a linebacker in some sort of situation, as you mentioned, that's a really good Houston Texans defense. So cracking the lineup and getting in there could be a challenge. So my gut is that he's going to be able to contribute in a lot of different places, starting with special teams. But defensively, for him, it's just getting on the field. And maybe the plan is to lean on those veterans for a little while and then get to a younger guy like Jaylin Reed in a couple of years.
Yeah, Gardner-Johnson, obviously not a long-term solution. Jimmy Ward, towards the end of his career. What I know about Reed personally is he's from a rough area of Detroit. He's talked about being somebody that guys from his neighborhood can look up to at some point. What can you tell us about Jaylin as a teammate and him personally?
Penn State has done a really good job in James Franklin's time of recruiting the Detroit area. And as you know, it is a tough place to grow up. It's a tough place to get out of. It's a tough place to ultimately build your resume and build your brand, that sort of thing. I've never heard a bad word about Jaylin Reed in terms of the teammate or the person at Penn State. As I mentioned, work ethic, character, those are extremely important things at Penn State. And I think there's so much conversation now in college football about guys that are more looking for the transaction than the transformation. And I think Jaylen's a really good example of a guy who underwent the transformation, not somebody who was just bouncing around place to place looking for NIL money, that sort of thing. Went to one school, stayed at one school, stayed true to that, trusted the development process. And I think so much, Robert, when you hear development, people are like, oh, that's a slow track. Like if he was really good, he'd have been doing X, Y, and Z, or he'd be in the first round, that sort of thing. Penn State's done a really nice job of recruiting the Detroit areas I mentioned, selling people on that development path. You see the way he developed. You see the way he performed in 2023, 2024 at Penn State, and it's preparing them to have that incremental growth and progress continue in the National Football League and not just plateau. So you're getting a person who is going to put in the work to get better every single year.
While I got you here, got to ask you about Juice Scruggs, another Nittany line that the Texans drafted just a couple of years ago. We're wondering where he fits in the offensive line puzzle right now. We've seen him at center and guard. Just out of curiosity, what can you tell us about watching and covering Scruggs at Penn State?
It was interesting. Another guy who I would say would be on that development path, and that every year I saw him get a little bit better at Penn State. The beauty of Phil Trautwein, the offensive line coach for Penn State, is that he cross-trains all of his offensive linemen. Now, for the most part, you're going to see guards who can play center, centers who can play guard, and then the opposite, tackles who can play guard, guards who can play tackle. You don't often see a tackle that can play center, and I think that's pretty normal at any level of football. But Juice was able to contribute at every guard and center position. I'd say his best days at Penn State were at center. His final season, he was starting at center for Penn State, and he played well. He was a surprise in that once he got drafted, he came in and played at a high level in his rookie season. So that was something that Penn State fans, I think, were pleasantly surprised about, because Penn State has had kind of a revolving door at center over the last few years. Hunter Norzad was a transfer from Cornell, came in after Juice Scruggs, and then you got to the Nick Dawkins era. Nick Dawkins is still at Penn State. So having a dominant center hasn't really been Penn State's thing the last few years, but having somebody capable that can bounce from position to position is really important. And as you well know, in this day and age in the National Football League, just like quarterbacks, offensive linemen are going to get dinged up, and you need to have guys who are talented and can fill out that depth chart, and especially play a lot of different positions. So I think that's the beauty of Juice Scruggs. I think in a perfect world, he's able to play at center predominantly, but he can do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what they do with him going forward. And I want to ask our listeners, what do you guys think of Aireontae Ersery and Jaylin Reed? Let me know in the YouTube comments. You can support us and get updates on every show that drops by subscribing on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up and listen while you're out and about with your favorite podcast app. Any last thoughts on Jaylin Reed, Tom? Anything that we missed?
No, honestly, I think you guys are getting a good one. And like I said a number of times here, is just I think there's a lot of different things that Jaylin Reed can bring to the table. It's low risk for the Houston Texans, taking him as a 6th-round pick. I've mentioned it a couple of times. You have a veteran secondary, so there's not this need for him to play right away. But his ability to play safety, his ability to play linebacker, be a pass rusher, be a run stuffer, play in the secondary, play coverage very well, take away the football, go get sacks, play on special teams. It's about value. You're getting a true professional. You're getting somebody with character and work ethic. That's been important to the Houston Texans for a long time, regardless of who's been in charge, who's been the head coach. But you continue to see the Houston Texans taking Penn State football players, and there's a reason for that. So I think Jaylin Reed, you'll see him be a major contributor, maybe not this year, but give it a few seasons under that, tutelage of those veterans, et cetera. And I think you're going to see Jaylin Reed be a really nice piece for the Houston Texans in the future.
It's interesting to see how these draft experts have done with the Texans, because the draft experts say they picked one Jaylin way too early and Jaylin Smith with USC, and they picked another Jaylin Reed much later than they thought he was going to go. So Jaylin Reed actually projected to be picked 4th round, like I said, and then Jaylin Smith is somebody that, some of them had projected in the 6th or 7th round. He's at Tom Hannifan on X. Tell us about your show and anything else that you want to plug.
Yeah, check out State of State, a Penn State football show, anywhere you get your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Myself and former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King breaking down Penn State football every single week, the latest news, notes, game previews, and recaps during the season. We're literally covering the team 52 weeks a year. So anything you need in terms of Penn State football, we have it up to the minute. So thank you for checking me out on X and Instagram at Tom Hannifan, TomHannifan.
Joining me to dissect the Texans draft, our favorite NFL draft guru, Joe DeLeone. Find his work at his YouTube channel, A to Z Sports Film Room. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but man, it's going to be interesting to hear your thoughts on the Texans draft, because Caserio had those 7 draft day trades, which led the NFL. And since Caserio became the Texans GM, his 25 draft day trades are only second to the Eagles GM, Howie Roseman. This is why I always find it comical to see all these Texans mocks on my social media timeline leading up to the draft. What a waste of time this is. I don't get it. Like, I know what Caserio is going to do, and it's not going to be what you think. And I'm curious, Joe, how do you like his aggressiveness?
Yeah, I thought that one of the things with this draft class is that there were a lot of quality day 2 players that you could get that could go on to be good starters. And when you're a team like the Texans that already has high level, high impact young guys like CJ Stroud and Will Anderson, you just need to fill the gaps and to find players that are going to give you highlight level plays, that are just going to be able to put out consistent performances on a week to week basis. You just need those guys that are going to be average to slightly above average throughout the course of the year. You didn't need to go and find an all-pro. So in a class like this, trading back had a ton of value. It had value in accumulating all the day 2 picks that they had. They were able to find what is likely going to be future starters. And some of the other moves that they made moving up to get Woody Marks, it is the ideal right fit for what they needed in their running back room. So I really like what Caserio did in understanding the strengths of the class and being able to position it in a spot where they can find the guys that can help take this team from young and exciting into one of the best teams in the AFC.
The story starts with him trading out of the first round. He takes wide receiver Jayden Higgins early second. What do you think of that move and Higgins?
Yeah, I think that trading out of that first round was, again, very smart move by them. Allow for the Giants, who are desperate to find their quarterback, completely reap the rewards of a team that is unsettled in that situation. I think that Jayden Higgins is a great pick for what they need. I think that one of the biggest takeaways from this off season or the past season as well is that there's a lot of inconsistency with the health of Nico Collins and especially Tank Dell. His availability for this year seems like he's not really going to be available. Having younger faces, but also high impact younger faces, I think is going to be huge for them. Jayden Higgins from Iowa State was one of the few guys for me that I thought could come in right away, end up being a 700-800 yard plus receiver, and then eventually develop into a premier X receiver on the outside. I love his route running. I love his concentration for a 6'4" player. He is so smooth at transitioning in and out of his breaks. And I think that play style is going to fit nicely with the current group of guys that they have on the roster.
There's some Nico Collins comps. Do you see that at all?
I do, but I think that Nico Collins is a little bit more of a different threat down the field. I think that where Jayden Higgins is going to thrive and he's going to succeed the most is winning along the sideline and winning over the middle of the field with his route running.
Don't know if you've heard the word, but we're kind of desperate for offensive linemen that do their job, and the Texans find maybe a gem in Golden Gopher tackle Aireontae Ersery. What did you think about him?
Yeah, I think that again in this this whole theme for this draft class is just finding high floor players, and Ersery was one of the few tackles that really fit that description. This tackle class was not good, and it's seemingly when they trading out of the first round was that indicator of, all right, we don't like the options available to us. We don't want to take the risk on Josh Simmons, who was a commonly projected player for them by a lot of people, including myself. The injury is not something that you can really truly bank on if you're a team like the Texans that needs somebody to play right away. Ersery, I think, shows great length. He shows just overall strong understanding and awareness of how to win with his frame. I think that for what this current Texans roster needs. I think that he could step in maybe at right tackle at the start of the year, allows for you to move and shuffle around some of the other faces. And in a way, whoever the weakest link is amongst those interior guys, you could just end up benching sounds a little bit extreme, but like you can end up bumping them out of the lineup and then end up moving around based on if Ersery is ready to go or not.
Any chance he could play guard?
He's a little too long for me for a guy that like I would want to play guard. And I think that he's also a player that I think succeeds a lot better when he's in space and he is able to use his length to win in pass protection. He just doesn't scream a player to me that I would make that transition and bump in. Blake Fisher is the first candidate that I would have that I'd be bumping inside. And I know that it seemingly is maybe a little bit of a sore subject with him when he was at Notre Dame. From what I was told, that at one point Notre Dame had wanted him and approached him to play guard, and he has the frame and the build to be a good guard, but he wanted to play tackle. He thought that he could be a really good tackle. He ended up being a second-round pick because he had that confidence in himself. But now, as this Texans offensive line needs to be better, he's the first guy that I bump inside and allow Ersery to play right tackle.
In the third round, they take Higgins' teammate, Jaylin Noel, another Iowa State wide receiver. What do you think about that?
Noel was one of my favorite prospects in this class, and I was really stunned that he was still on the board there. And I think that the Texans quite possibly were stunned as well. I don't think that they came into this draft thinking, hey, we need to get 2 receivers, but having a player like him who is super physical, has great concentration, is very explosive in short areas, is going to plug in and eventually maybe take over that slot receiver role. I think he reminds me a lot of Steve Smith, the former Panthers and Ravens receiver who wasn't afraid to hit people, was always going to get in people's faces whenever he felt that he had the chance to power through them and break tackles. I had the chance to actually have Jaylin Noel on the A to Z Film Room channel. We had a couple of interviews, and he was one of them that we were the most excited about. And he talked about how he and Jayden Higgins have such a great relationship. And I think that not only getting one of those guys or the other, you're getting both of them, and they already have an established chemistry and they love playing with one another. I think that that is such an underrated takeaway from this draft class.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the fact that one of their old teammates, or I think it was at least Jalen's old teammate, Xavier Hutchinson, his job might be in jeopardy because these 2 buddies are coming in. It's kind of crazy.
Right. Ironic that it's exciting that these Iowa State guys are all coming in, but yeah, he's probably the first one who's maybe not on the chopping block, but like is going to get probably pushed down in what's now a super, super crowded receiver room.
All right, Joe, the Texans made a trade to move up in the third round for USC quarterback Jaylin Smith, probably Casario's most questioned move, considering where some scouts had Smith. What round did you have Smith, and how did you feel about the deal?
Yeah, he was a mid to late day 3 guy, but I think that this is just generally an underrated player. I think that it's easy to just be generally critical of a guy who wasn't in the premier group of top corners that we were being discussed by most media members, but you're still getting a pretty shifty athlete, a guy that I think could plug in the slot for you. Not the longest player that you're getting in Smith, but the 4.4 speed is something that shows up on tape for him. I think that one thing that's been super notable with Caserio and D'Amico Ryans just overall is that they have taken guys that haven't exactly been premier, just like super hyped up players, and then they've turned them into quality starters. Like Kalen Bullock was a guy who last cycle that a lot of people, a teammate of Smith's, also from USC, that I think a lot of people had low expectations for, and he goes on to have a really good rookie season. So this could end up being a really underrated, just at the very least, depth play for boosting and rounding out the secondary.
Caserio then uses next year's third round pick to jump into the fourth round and draft USC running back Woody Marks. In an interview this week, Caserio said a future third is a present value fourth. I have no idea what he meant by that, Joe. Maybe you can decipher it, but you seem to like Brooks, right? Was he worth that third?
I really do like Brooks. And I think that there was, at the moment of this trade, there was just a lot of like freak out. I think there were a lot of people that were just like, oh, why would you do that? I think that for what this running back class was like with the depth, the other caveat with it is that if you had a specific player that you highly valued their skill set, you should prioritize going after them. Woody Marks was not, again, another player that wasn't in that conversation of one of the top 10 running backs in the consensus. But when you already have Joe Mixon, you've got your thumper, having a player who is as dynamic of a receiver and as productive of a receiver as Woody Marks, that is a skill set that your running back room needed. You need to have this third down weapon that you can use on screens, that you can maybe even motion into the slot, all of those things. I think for the average team, Woody Marks probably doesn't make sense where they took him. But taking him in the 4th round and making that move to go up and get him works really well for this team, because you're just trying to create so many different weapons. I think that like the biggest thing that this signaled to me with drafting 2 receivers of 2 different body types and then now a high impact receiving running back is that you now have all the artillery to attack downfield. I think that the Texans are going to be super explosive and aggressive through the air. And I think that this pick especially is a key signal for that.
And an underrated part of this, and I have to think this plays into it, Joe, is CJ Stroud. You're on the clock with him with this cheap contract. You want to go after something big while you can. So, hey, a 3rd rounder's nice next year. But if you have a guy that you can get this year and have him an extra year before Stroud hits that big contract, I think that's a big deal.
Yeah. And like, that's like the biggest part with me with this entire draft class is that like your defense has been pretty strong. You've had the ability to maximize outcomes from a number of players that the expectations were kind of low for. And I think offensively, there was just a lot left to be desired. And it showed up in the way that you and I have talked about this before. It showed up in the way that they played against the Chiefs in the playoffs, is that like their offensive line underperformed, again, inconsistent health availability for the receivers. So understanding that instead of like being overly aggressive like last offseason and trading for a Stephon Diggs, why not try to target some of the explosive talent that's in the draft class? Try and find as many different avenues and gadgets and pieces as possible. Sometimes having a big premier name is not always the solution. I think that the Kansas City Chiefs, who they lost to in the playoffs, are a good example of that, where they know how to maximize very specific skill sets to perform very specific concepts in very specific parts of the game. When you have so many different tools, it allows for somebody like CJ Stroud to hit their stride, to hit their potential. And this is looking even further down the line. When eventually you get to the spot where you do have to pay CJ Stroud, you are able to pick and choose which guys you bring back. If Jayden Higgins turns out to be a 1,200-yard receiver, he ends up being really good, and you have to kind of decide, like, what do we do with him? You've got so many other players, so many other quality options that you could theoretically trade a guy like that and recoup value. So my whole point with this is that when you're able to develop and find different players for different skill sets, you're able to maximize it in so many different ways, not only on the field, but in the future when you're trying to build your roster.
The 6th round, Texans took safety Jaylin Reed. And from what I read, Joe, the draft analyst really loved Reed as a steal at that point. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, I thought that Reed was one of my top 10 safeties in this class. And I know that safety wasn't like a super pressing need. And I don't think that he is going to be a guy who starts. So taking him in the 6th round is good value for him, and playing amongst a group of defensive backs that have been really productive, you're going to be able to get the most out of him. That was his role with Penn State this past year. They had some really good defensive line play. They had some really good corner play. And Jaylin Reed showed some pretty good instincts. He flew around the field. I believe he was a 4.4 guy. He ran a 4.49 at the NFL Combine, underrated jumps, jumping over 33 inches. So you're getting some explosiveness and some underrated athleticism with him being a depth piece within that defense. So I absolutely think that was an underrated pick. There were some other safeties that went ahead of him that I would have much rather valued Reed, and he could end up being, like a lot of these DBs that we've talked about over the past couple of drafts, just a quality name for a successful defense.
Yeah, also a great pass rusher at safety, which kind of reminds me a little bit of Jalen Petrie in that way. Maybe he can play sort of that role or something similar, I would think.
Yeah, and having dynamic blitzers at safety is something that's hard to come by. Not a lot of guys like to hit. Not a lot of guys are willing to get physical, and Jaylin Reed has the frame to do that. Like, he is a guy that's over 6 foot. He's listed at over 210 pounds. Like, this is a big bigger dude for your typical either nickel safety or free safety type of a prospect.
The strangest pick from a lot of Texans fans, and maybe this is from draft experts as well, was the 6th round pick of Florida quarterback Graham Mertz. And Joe, I'm guessing that they like him as a future backup and a replacement for Davis Mills, since Mills has got just one more year on his rookie contract. What did you think of Mertz, and how would he compare to Mills in your mind?
Well, first of all, he's going to be a cheaper option than trying to keep Davis Mills. We always see that these backup guys that have starting experience, I'm not saying that somebody's going to go sign him to start, but you never know when he enters free agency that somebody doesn't bring him in as competition or just an unsettled quarterback room to have, a couple of options. So it's good to have this cheap player, this cheap prospect to turn to in the future when that situation arises. I would imagine that Mertz probably is going to be a practice squad guy. He was really underrated when he was coming from Wisconsin and going to Florida. No one had expectations he was going to be good. He was almost clowned on that was all Billy Napier was able to get. And his accuracy, his decision-making, it improved greatly. Him not finishing the year as a starter had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with DJ Lagway being super talented and him suffering injuries throughout the year. So I think that there's something to be tapped into. You don't need a high upside starter. I think that he fits the description of a guy who sticks around for a long time, who found success in the SEC, that could work on this roster.
Would he have gotten drafted, do you think, if the Texans didn't draft him in the 6th? Could he have been an undrafted free agent?
I think somebody still would have taken him. I think that knowing how few options there were at quarterback, I really do think that somebody would have still taken him, because, again, there's just, this class was awful. As you started to kind of get into the 6th, 7th round, there just were not many players of his experience level, of his traits level, of all of those things that you could hope to turn into a backup. I think that there just were a lot of dart throws. I mean, to the point where Cam Miller from North Dakota State was a bit of an unexpected draft pick who went to the Raiders, is a good example of that. There just was such a short amount of options for teams trying to solve that problem.
Just want to remind our listeners real quick, what do you think of Joe's takes on this draft? What do you think of the draft in general? Let me know in the YouTube comments. You can support us and get updates on every show that drops by subscribing on YouTube, of course, and give us a thumbs up and listen while you're out and about with your favorite podcast app. Okay, Joe, the 7th round picks were defensive tackle Kyonte Hamilton and tight end Luke Lachey. Any potential steals with these two? What was your thought there?
Yeah, Lachey has been a guy who's been underrated overall, has not had the production that I think a lot of people had hoped. It's easy to get excited about an Iowa tight end. Kyonte Hamilton was a decent player as well. Got to see him at the Rutgers Pro Day when I went. Didn't stand out to me a ton, but both of these players, knowing where the strengths are right now on the Texans roster and like looking at their depth chart, I find it hard to believe that Lachey even makes the team at tight end, considering the multiple years of investments that they've had bringing in Dalton Schultz and drafting Brevin Jordan and Cade Stover over the past couple of years. And I don't know if Hamilton's going to be able to really crack the mix of defensive tackles with the way that this roster has been built through the interior and along their defensive line. I think they're both decent players. I think Lachey does have some potential. If I were to pick one of the two that like unexpectedly stuck around and maybe found a role in this team, maybe even as the second tight end, it probably would be Luke Lachey.
Yeah, Lachey could benefit from the fact that somebody gets injured and he gets a chance. And also, if he can stick around on the practice squad for a year, Dalton Schultz, that contract they might be able to get out. I think that they can get out of by next year. How would you grade the Texans draft overall?
They were one of the few teams. I had 5 teams that I gave A's to. My reasoning for this, in a draft class where there was a very finite number of guys that felt like all pros, there were some traitsy players that we're hoping ending up developing. But in a year where it was mostly good level starters, this is exactly what the Texans needed to do. Not only did you end up getting great value with some of your picks, with Aireontae Ersery, where you took him, with Jaylin Noel, where you took him way later than I think everybody expected, the ability to get a guy like Jayden Higgins and to turn this receiver room into a good one, into what now feels like a dangerous one with so many different options. felt like you needed to address offensive line within the first 3 rounds, and you get a good high floor starter. That is a heck of a selection by them. And I really liked most of their day 3 picks. I know that there's easy ways to nitpick their approach, but a Graham Mertz pick is one that's not going to get highly regarded, but could end up being one in a few years that we talk about as like, man, he's just been a really nice third guy that stuck around for a really long time, or maybe even the backup that you're talking about. Like, man, I'm glad that we took Graham Mertz because we haven't had to ask that question of who is our backup quarterback. And especially the biggest one for me is Woody Marks. I really think that Woody Marks is going to turn into a super dynamic receiver. He is exactly what they needed. They didn't need to go and draft one of the other bigger thumpers that were in the class. They didn't need to go and maybe even try to address bringing in one of the speedsters like Bashal Tootin or one of those guys, or Dylan Sampson. I think that having Marks and having that new receiving option, the reliability that he brings to the table as a receiver, is, again, another thing that this team exactly needed. I feel like when you and I spoke and I came on before the draft, I felt like a lot of the things that we discussed, they came out of this class with solutions and also guys that can contribute day one that can help this team finally reach their goals. I don't think that this is an immediate Super Bowl roster, but within the next couple of years, this is another foundation that starts to elevate the team to take them to the next level.
What did you think about the rest of the teams in the AFC South, the Texans competition, Colts, Jaguars, Titans? Titans get another quarterback for the second time in a couple of years. How do you feel about him, and how he compares to, say, Will Levis when you remember him coming out?
Yeah, I think that Cam Ward is a lot more natural of a player than Will Levis. I think that Cam Ward is exactly the pick they needed to have. They were more of like in the B range, and I had a lot of teams that I gave Bs to because they just did a good enough of a job, but they didn't really find the premier edge rush talent, high impact guy. Now they got Femi Oladeja, who's a great player, but it kind of made you wonder, what else could they have captured if they had addressed that sooner in the draft? I thought that they did a good job of starting to lay the foundation for, and could unexpectedly end up being a good team this year, kind of like CJ Stroud was as a rookie and Jaden Daniels was as a rookie. They could end up surprising people because Cam Ward is to me a player who could have an early impact. I thought that the Jaguars' decision to trade up and get Travis Hunter was extremely aggressive, but it's a bit high risk. Them giving up next year's first rounder, you better hope that you're in the playoff conversation. You give Trevor Lawrence a weapon, but the rest of their draft class kind of left a lot to be desired. But I will admit, the Colts were one of the only other 5 teams that I gave an A grade to. They were one of the teams that I thought, like, man, you needed to find a way to provide options and consistency to Anthony Richardson. Tyler Warren's how you do that. Tyler Warren, with up and down erratic quarterback play from Drew Aller last year with Penn State, he stepped up to the plate and had a ton of big plays in big moments where they needed him. Jalen Travis from Iowa State was a guy that I really liked who could end up starting for them, depending on how they want to move around that offensive line and figure out who fits where. And then I'm also a very big fan of what they did by getting DJ Giddens, where Jonathan Taylor is kind of approaching this point where the wear and tear starts to build up. You now have another guy of a relatively similar profile, not the same level of explosiveness, but can end up taking carries away to create more balance on offense. So that would be the one team for me in the AFC South that really felt like they did all of the right things alongside what the Texans did.
Yeah. Quarterback. It's, I always point out that, hey, the Colts, they continue to look for a quarterback, but do I feel bad for them? After about 20 years of Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck, no, that's a big fat zero. And, I'm still ticked off that, as soon as Peyton leaves, they fall right into Andrew Luck. You get the first pick only so many times in the course of history. The Texans have had 3 number 1 overall picks, and all 3 times it was a terrible quarterback draft class. And they got Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning. So, it sucks. He's at Joe DeLeone. It's the A to Z Sports Film Room, right?
A to Z Sports Film Room. Yep.
Tell us a little bit about it and anything else that you want to plug.
Yeah, so me and my co-host Ryan Roberts, we transitioned to talking about the 2026 guys. So if you want to kind of take a look, if you're a college football fan, you want to find out hey, who are the big names to know? We are getting you educated and prepared over what's going to be a slow summer, but an exciting one because there's just so much that we get to talk about with much less distractions of an actual draft coming up at A to Z Sports Film Room channel on YouTube and at Joe DeLeone on X. You can find me where I'll be promoting all my stuff. It's been so great to catch up. Appreciate you having me on as always. And as I always say every single time, I'm excited what the Texans did, and I'm hoping that they can capitalize on it and have a huge year.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.